national issues.
Paul, explain this to me. He was originally charged with these immigration violations, but that was shelved. Correct? That never went to trial?
Never went to trial because the government went first on this bank fraud theory, and they got such a tremendous conviction and potential sentence from that there was really no reason for them to pursue the immigration counts at that point.
And this was a case, I assume you believe, where charge after charge after charge was piled on top of one another, needlessly.
Well, and what really happened here is under the sentencing guidelines that determine how long a sentence is under the federal system, what really drives the sentence for a fraud count is the so-called amount of the fraud. And in this case, the prosecutors essentially put restrictions on what the Rubashkin family could do such that this meat processing plant, this kosher meat processing plant, went bankrupt. And when that happened, it drove up the amount of the fraud because there were no funds left to pay off the banks. And that was what was really the key to the government initially seeking a life sentence in this case.
A life sentence.
And then they backed down on that because, you know, a whole host of former attorneys generals and solicitors generals objected. But they eventually asked for 25 years, and the judge gave 27 years to a first-time offender.
Not surprising, given that you learned, and Nicholas McKinney, you learned that the judge, against all precedents, had been in close contact with the prosecution in this case?
Yeah, actually, after Mr. Rubashkin was sentenced, Freedom of Information Act documents came to light that showed that the judge in the case had met with prosecutors, with Homeland Security, for 7 months leading up to the raid. Of course, that's alarming.
Well, I want to find out how alarming that is. You have certainly untold experience at a courtroom. How unusual was that?
Well, it is unusual, and I think that if there's a justification for this coordination, it's that they are going to do all these arrests. It's in a courthouse that doesn't usually have this kind of volume, because if there were immigration violations suspected, they'd bring a lot of people in. And so you might think that there would be a need at least to give a heads up. But this went well beyond this. This was months of meetings. And at that point, if the judge has had all those meetings, whether or not it was right to have those meetings, the real question then is, having had all those meetings in the case, is the judge the right judge to sit on that case, or should it be referred to a colleague? And that's really what, because Mr. Rubashkin and his lawyers didn't know the details about all these meetings, they weren't in a position to raise that during the trial. They raised it afterwards, and were told they couldn't.
You know, I'm often struck, looking at this in a broader context, how often that the measure of prosecutorial success is not what's right or what's wrong, but how many victories prosecutors win. It's almost like a football, a coach's record in the NFL or something like that, which strikes me as a terrible miscarriage of justice.
Well, it is. You know, there's this great saying that is around the rotunda outside the Attorney General's office that goes roughly that the United States wins its point in court whenever justice is done to one of its citizens. And that really should be the measure. But instead, I think in some of these situations, it's how many counts you can bring, what kind of sentence you can get, and that's really, I think, a mistake to lose sight of that very important reminder that's what important to our justice system is that justice be done to citizens in court.
Nicholas, what can be done to change that dynamic of the prosecutors trying to score victories instead of do justice?
Well, there are some remedies available. There's a bill that's sort of languishing in the House right now, S-306, which is suggesting a National Criminal Justice Reform Act, which would increase oversight and also, allow some mechanisms where prosecutors can seek guidance from, the Department of Justice, for example. I also think that, obviously our hope is that the Supreme Court will hear Mr. Rubashkin's appeal because it will allow them to rule on some, I guess, gray areas.
Okay. Nicholas, I got to cut you off right there. We're flat out of time. The name of the movie is Unjustified, The Unchecked Power of America's Justice System, produced by Nicholas McKinney. Paul Clement, thank you very much for doing this. Good to see you. My pleasure. $16 trillion is a number not easily forgotten, especially when that